Hello, I'm Robin and welcome to Multi Music Technology. This is the Instruo Seashell. Something along those sorts of lines. The Seashell is a gorgeously compact. I mean, look at it. Isn't it adorable? Have you ever seen anything quite so cute? It's so cute, in fact, that I don't have any stands I can fit it on. And so I've decided to strap it to this phone arm here, just for a little bit of animated wobbly feel to my video, which I think we'll all enjoy, I think, as we go through. But it is beautifully compact, and yet baked inside is this glorious 2-oscillator analog synthesizer engine, a low-pass filter, a wavefolder, multiple waveforms, sync envelopes, LFOs, and all sorts of other bits and pieces squirreled away behind through a computerized control interface. So not only do you have this little semi-modular analog synthesizer, but it also can be pulled apart and expanded upon and played with and tickled by software. It creates this kind of a hybrid working environment that you weren't expecting from Instruo, and I imagine it's not going to be to everyone's taste, but there's something in there that solves problems and offers a way of working which actually makes a lot of sense once you get down to it. Because often we are playing with these things in isolation, or we match it up with a couple of other bits and pieces on our desktop and play with things together. But what this is able to do is somehow engage itself within your DAW workflow so that it's there as a perpetual hardware interface through a plugin, through software automation and control and MIDI shenanigans, through matrix modulation and back into its analog self. Is it more than one thing and not perhaps 6 and half a dozen of another? Those are the sorts of things that we're going to look at, because it makes you think a little bit differently about what you're doing, and it's really quite curious. And in some ways you want everything in hardware, and yet this offers most in hardware and a lot of special features in software. I'm not sure we always want that, but at the same time it enables your DAW to act as the point of progress and as the point of capture of all of this stuff. So it's not alone, it's not isolated, it's not there so you have to capture your performance in one snapshot of a go. It enables you to wire it in to your DAW, so it can be saved with projects. It could be recalled, can you believe? And then you can start chipping away at it again from the place where you last were. But that is in the software realm. In the hardware realm, that's not all there, and you have just what you see. And so in some ways you feel that, yeah, but I want all the stuff that's in the software on the hardware, or do I want all the hardware in the software, or is there any point in having the hardware if I have the software? These are the questions that tumble out, that when you start using this thing and you start getting down to how it connects, how it works, how the audio MIDI is doing its thing, how the recall is working, and what I can do when I have this in isolation as opposed to what I can do when I have it connected to a computer, because those are potentially two different things. Are you confused? Well, yes, maybe, because it's a synthesizer that makes you think about things. We don't always want that. Sometimes we just want to get on with it, but it does that too. It is a very much a getting on with it type of synthesizer. I like and have enjoyed that tremendously, that you can sit down and just go to town and have all of your analog dreams fulfilled within this little monophonic semi-modular. So maybe that's all you need, but you can't get away from the fact that it has this computerized interface, which I've got sitting over here. I mean, I have to have a lot of paraphernalia set up for this review because it's standalone, but it's also plug-in connected. And you've got to be able to show all of those different things and why those are important and how they are different, because they are different. It's curious. It's very curious. It's not a straightforward review because it's more than one thing. And there are deep layers to it. Jason at Instruo has done a massive 2-hour tutorial on the Seashell, and that's worth watching because it's full of interesting, fascinating details on how the thought process goes, how the workflow works, how you get through it and out the other side. And it really does deep dive into all of the features. So I'm not going to necessarily try to repeat all of that. What I'm going to do is we're going to look at the basics on its own. We're going to look at how it connects to a computer and what that scenario is like. How does it work together? And I'm going to just talk about how it makes me feel deep down inside. Because Instruo are a fascinating company, and I'm a massive fan. Although I don't actually have much of their gear, but I really like their attitude, their intention. I like what they do. I like the fact that they're employing loads and loads of people up in Scotland to make fabulously premium Eurorack modules and now synthesizers. In fact, it's worth saying that this is not a Eurorack module. It is a standalone synth. Although it looks very much like a Eurorack module, it's probably the thing it does least best is integrate with Eurorack. Although it does that too. All I'm saying is that it works really, really well via MIDI and USB, and those sorts of connections are primary, I think. Whereas you can connect via analog connection and integrate it into your Eurorack. I feel that all of its best shiny stuff comes out when it's integrated through your computer and through MIDI, perhaps. And so if you're just looking for something to integrate with your Eurorack, yeah, it will do that, but this is going to take you in a different direction. This is going to take you back potentially towards your computer. It's going to fit into a workflow that you're actually looking to use a DAW in order to make music rather than necessarily just spinning stuff up on your desktop. But you can do that as well. See, it's multiple things of looking at. Is it this? Is it that? I don't know. Is it all these things? Can it be all these things? Does it need to be all these things? I mean, when it first came out, a lot of people suggested that it was the No Coast. It was like Make Noise's No Coast. And I was upset by that because I don't like the No Coast. I had the No Coast. I could not make it make noises. It was really, really hard. Very, very difficult to use. I know lots of people love it. That's fine. So when Instruo sent this to me, I thought, I hope it's not like the No Coast. I hope I can understand it. And there are similarities, I think, between Make Noise and Instruo. I think they are very similar companies in as much as their attitudes to life and the world and everything, and just the precision and the excellence involved in the design of their products. Those things are very similar. This is not the No Coast because you can get sound out of it straightforwardly, easily, just by doing normal things. You don't have to learn a load of hieroglyphs or understand a completely new way of working. It works like a semi-modular subtractive, slash wavefolding type synthesizer. So you can relax, you can get it, you can put it down, you can make noises that you're familiar with, you can turn the filter, you can tune things. And wavefold things. So it's straightforward enough to give you all of that, which is a massive relief, I have to say. But the level of excellence and precision and premium quality that this all is absolutely is on a par with Make Noise and other such companies. So that's great. So, I mean, overall, if you want a spoiler, great job. Great job, Instruo. Fascinating, curious, multi-leveled, multifaceted, analog to its core, and yet with this intriguing digital engine that allows you to add further control and other bits of digital wizardry. So that's a good 10 minutes of just talking nonsense for a bit. So I think what we should do is I'm going to bring you in. We'll look at the basics as it is. And then I'll look at installing it onto Windows, because that's an interesting thing. And then how it works standalone with its software, and then within a DAW. And then we'll come back out and go, so how do we feel about all that? So that's the plan. Let's get on with that. The Seashell then. Isn't it just the most gorgeous thing you ever saw? What a lovely thing. It is remarkably small. I mean, this is a Eurorack module next to it, as you can see. It's smaller than that even, which is just incredible. So packed into here is a semi-modular, analog, dual oscillator, wavefolding filter-driven synthesizer. A single voice, if you like, running two oscillators, which run together normally, but also can modulate each other. The bottom one can also become an LFO through a natty little button here. There's more that you can do than you can see, because there's a few things hidden underneath various button presses. Comes with some very useful bits of documentation like this, which tells you what all the buttons do, if you can work that out. And this will be helpful at this point. The app over here I also have running at the moment, but we're not going to focus on that. We're going to attempt to just show you what the box itself can do without messing about with any of the extended additional digital functionality. So this is what we're going to try to focus on for a few minutes. For a few minutes, yes, it's going to work. Got a scope down here, so hopefully you'll be able to have an idea of what the waveforms are doing. I've got the left and right signals just slightly offset, so you can see one is bigger than the other. Seemed like a good idea, who knows? So there are all sorts of things you can do in the software, like load presets and stuff like that, but we're trying to move away from that. So there's no preset engine when you're looking at the hardware. It is just what you see. But to get to that point, you've got to kind of initialize it first, because this, I believe, will carry over. Anything you do in software will remain in the box so that you can use it separately away from the computer. So in order to make sure that nothing else is going on, if you hold all four buttons, we should now have the default patch. Now there are a number of things on here which don't have a digital representation, so in fact there are things here which could be doing things that you don't even know about. It can get a little bit complicated if you think about it too deeply, so let's not do that. If we zero everything, there's indents on these coarse and fine knobs. If you find everything at the top, if you're using MIDI, then this will be C3. I believe. I'm going to turn a couple of other things down, put the filter up, take off any of the other envelope type stuff, so that it should hopefully be, FM is all centered, should just be what it is. So we have two oscillators. They can have different waveforms. The waveforms are chosen through the source button here at the top, which takes us through our menu of waveforms. From here, depending on what sort of waveform it is, it will either go through the Wavefolder, or it will go to the filter, which is here. You've got resonance, you've got envelope amount. You've also got an envelope amount going into the wavefolder, so the wavefolder and the filter can both be modulated by the envelope, which is here, attack, release. You can also fire the envelope with this button, which is kind of nice. There are 3 different envelope modes, which we'll have a look at. Thank you, Mr. Cockrell. In a moment, you have outputs, fixed outputs here for waveforms. You've also got, I can't remember what that is. It might be, I think it's the output for the filter, output from the wavefolder, I think. And you've also got some CV ins, so you can override the internal normalization of envelope to wavefolder, envelope to filter. You've got FM inputs over here. You've also got a 1 volt per octave input and the gate input here for running the envelope if you wanted to run everything analog. I'm running via MIDI in the back, TRS. There's also a CV input in the back which you can assign to all sorts of things, which isn't going to help us at this point because you can't assign it just in the hardware. If you look through the manual, you'll see all sorts of bits. It's very, very clear, or tries to be very, very clear, what is analog and what is software driven. And that's very important because there's a lot of difference between the two. There's a lot of things you can't do here, and there's also things you can't do in the software. It's really curious the way this is put together, that there's, you sort of, I don't know, you sort of have to use everything in every eventuality in order to get the fulfillment of whatever it is the Seashell is offering you. But for the moment, we're just going to focus on the waveforms. So let's just do that bit first. I'll try not to get distracted into other bits and pieces. Let's just purely go from the waveforms. Now I can turn off the envelope, I believe, if I hold, how do I do that? I think I'll probably need shift as well. Yeah, all right. So if I do, so shift is also the source button. So I hold that, hold envelope, and now we're in drone mode. Okay, we're doing it. So currently I've got 2 oscillators. The top one is running wavefolding. The bottom one is running square wave. That's our default setting. You can see that on the scope. So that means one of the oscillators will respond to the wavefolding. As you can see, it's really quite beautiful. That's nice. I've got no control, as far as I'm aware, over pulse width modulation in the hardware. So I know we've got a square wave, but I'm not aware of any way that I can do anything with that currently. So let's just step through the other options under the source button. So coming up next, we should have dual sawtooth. Just going to listen to the waveforms. I'm not going to, I just want to play with the filter all the time, but we're just going to stick with what we've got. So there's a little bit of detuning going on. That's good, solid 2 sawtooths waveforms. Next up, we've got wavefolding and sawtooth. So back in the top again, we have wavefolding. And then the underlying one is a sawtooth. If you think about it, you could very easily pitch this down an octave. You give you a sub-octave on on the Wavefolder. Next up, we've got Sawtooth and Square. It's really nice. It's a really nice sound. There's no waveform mixing, in as much as I can't alter the level of either one in the hardware. I'm not sure I can in the software either, thinking about it, but I certainly can't here, which is a bit of a shame. Then we go through single waveforms, so just the Wavefolder by itself. Which starts off essentially as a sine wave. There is also a Sawtooth option, but again that's only in the software, so I'm not going to worry about that for the minute. Then we get the Sawtooth by itself, so the Wavefolder is no longer working, and the second oscillator is no longer working. So we've just got the one oscillator. Like so. Then we have the square wave by itself. This is on oscillator 2, so oscillator 1 is no longer doing anything. There seems to be a little bit of pulse width modulation going on, which is in the software. It's an animate function in the software, which I can take out, but is there by default just to give it a little bit of movement, which is frankly gorgeous, but it's not something I can access from here. And then finally by itself you've got another Sawtooth wave just in the bottom one, so again the top's not doing anything at all. You could of course, no you couldn't, you could of course, could you? Even though there's no waveform allocated to the first oscillator, I can still use it as FM into the other one. Which is interesting. It's almost as if you have these waveforms which are created, but by default it has a background sine wave which you can use for other modulation purposes. Whether it's a low frequency oscillator, using the LF button here to turn this one into a lower frequency thing, or using it directly for FM because those two things are normalized together. It's a little bit mysterious, this bit it's probably in the manual somewhere, but I haven't quite discovered exactly what's going on. But it was quite a surprise to me to find that even when I'm only running one waveform, the other one still can do modulation stuff. So those are the waveforms that you have to play with. Use the source button just to step through them. So in order to use the filter, let's go back to dual Sawtooth, and let's see what this does. Let's put the resonance half up. Now I have to say, this is probably the gentlest filter, the most well-behaved, polite filter I've come across in a long time. If I whack it all the way up, it's beautiful. but you would also probably expect it to go further. But it just stays in this sweet spot. So there's no self-oscillation, I don't think. There's no growl or overdrive. It's just blissful. Really, really nice. Now the resonance doesn't have any digital control, so it's only ever set on the hardware. Try a couple of different sources. Drop off with it either. It's a really just lovely, heartwarming filter. Let's go back to our two saw teeth and let's start introducing the envelope. So the envelope is here, simply attack and release. There are three different sorts of envelopes we'll come to in a minute. Now currently I don't have the VCA engaged. Again, it's because I was holding this. So if I want the envelope to control the VCA, I'm going to have to re-enable it. But at the moment it should still be running to the filter. So you've got a CV amount here, envelope amount. Attack and release. Want it to control the VCA as well, I have to hold that and turn it back on. There we go. So there are three different sorts of envelope which you can get to by holding source and pressing it. So we're now into ADSR mode, which you can tell because I don't know, how can you tell? Because it's orange. When is it orange? I don't know. Perhaps when I press it. Okay, that's now glowing orange. Does that indicate it's ADSR? If I press that, it's now cycling. If I press it again, it's AR. Okay, so white is just attack release. Orange is ADSR. And then the thing in between, the pinky, that's cycling AR. So I'm going to just put it on ADSR for the moment. See that the colour scheme here is really quite extraordinary. I mean, it's beautiful, it's nuanced, it's up there, man, in really feeling comfortable in the tonal differences aesthetically, and how we can notice those fine, tiny little minuscule adjustments in order to see what's going on. I mean, it could have been a red, a green and a blue LED, couldn't it? It could have been those, but no, this is Instruo. So in Instruo you have to train your eyes to understand the slight differences between sort of off-white and white, perhaps some orange. It's a challenge, but hey, we're up for it. So now I believe we should be on ADSR, which means I can hold the gate open when I play a note. Release is the same for decay. You can't set a sustain level on the hardware, you would have to do that in the software. But probably the best way to look at it is that ADSR is essentially a gated envelope, whereas AR is a triggered envelope, just a fall and rise. Rise and fall. Which is very nice. Cycling just uses the rise and fall in order to create a little LFO. One other thing to mention at this point is the diffuse knob in the middle. So this is a little engine which just scatters the sound a little bit. It's sort of a reverb, it's sort of not a reverb. Let's get something playing again. Get it? Great. Let's have a look at the wave folding. So if we rock off down to our single waveform, which is just at the top. So this is our wave folding. Now this also has a direct connection to the envelope, so you can turn that up and you will get a nice little bit of movement through the wavefolder. Let's get rid of the filter for the minute. Now the Wavefolder has a special power called the Analogue Symmetry Modulator knob or something, which is this one here. It's mysterious. I'm not entirely convinced I know what it does. However, if I am playing something up here somewhere, I can turn this and it will introduce some modulation. If I get rid of the envelope for the moment. There's just a little bit there. Let's turn the envelope off for a minute. Right, there's a little bit of animation that's in there by default. If I turn the animation off, there's our complete wavefolding circuit. Now if I turn this up, it starts to apply a little bit of modulation to it, which is really interesting. The other interesting thing is then Oscillator 2 seems to have an effect on it for reasons I can't explain. FM is not engaged. But it's only there while this knob is engaged. Curious, see now it's not doing anything. But essentially using this knob in a wave-folding waveform means that I just get some additional craziness and tonal interest going on. So the low frequency oscillator option here allows me to take this and route it into something else. And at the moment it's still fiddling around with the Wavefolder, but I can also take its own output and use that to modulate something else. Interesting. If I take that out, I've also got audio rate modulation into things like the filter. One more thing. Synchronization. There's several versions of sync. You've got the fundamental, half, quarter, I think, which essentially does different things. So if you turn sync on, you can feel it pull itself together a little bit more, and then you have that lovely hard sync sound. That's one sort of sync. Half sync, quarter sync, I think. And it'll constantly run around different syncs until you hold it, and then you've got your detuning again. So as I mentioned before about the FM, you've got normalization between the two, so I can just turn that up in either direction, switch it on, either exponential or linear. Or whatever you want. Something along those lines. Something along those lines. So, I mean, in summary on the hardware then, you have these two oscillators kicking out a choice of waveforms, some of which can be folded, all of which can be filtered. You can FM, you can sync, you can release an oscillator to be a modulator, you can envelope in either gate, triggered or cyclic fashion, and you've always got these outputs of waveforms ready to put into other stuff. You've always got modulation that can come in from other places if you don't want to cross-modulate within your thing itself. You've got a weird symmetry bizarre knob that will do strange things, and you've got some kind of weird diffusing reverby type thing all set in the middle. So that is your hardware game, and you can play with that without any connection to any computer or anything else. Sit it on your desktop. You've got stereo output on the back if you don't want to take these out. You've got MIDI, or you've got 1 volt and gate. Here, if you want to play it in an analog way, that is the hardware. That's your hardware experience. Now, there's a whole other experience to be had once we start looking at the software. This is the Seashell Controller. It's a very clever piece of software. It works oddly for an editor, particularly on Windows, because Windows doesn't like this sort of thing. It's probably much smoother on the Apple Mac, as Jason shows in the Instruo video manual for this. But on Windows, it's just that little bit quirkier. So here, first of all, is me installing the thing. Right, I wanted to capture my attempt at installing this on my Surface Pro. So, I mean, I've already got downloads open over here. I think that seems to be the place to go. Let's have a look first and foremost. So in the firmware bit, that is not the place to go. Preset editors. That's also not the place to go. Right, well, let's not do what I thought I would do, and instead let's go to the Seashell page to see whether that has what we need. And indeed it does, because it's obviously it wouldn't be under downloads, would it? No, that would just be stupid. No, it's going to be here. Right, so let's go for Windows. It appears to be downloading. Open it up. There's a README. Should we do that just to belt and braces it? Okay, install instructions. Copy. Oh, really? Copy the plugin file to your preferred library folder. Okay. Copy the controller app to your preferred location. What? Right click on it, followed by create shortcut. Right, so okay, so they're giving you all the heavy lifting to do. It's not an installer as such. It's not going to do things for you. You're going to have to work this out for yourself. Well, like it says, you stick it in your documents folder. I guess that's what you do. And this here, the VST folder, I'm just going to copy that. And then I'm going to have to try to remember where VST things hang out. Common files, VST3, paste. Access denied. Okay, so I'll put the VST3 thing in there. Awesome. Meanwhile, I put this in Documents, Seashell, into here. Are you staying with me? Okay, this I'm going to copy. Then I'm going to go to the desktop, and I'm going to copy a shortcut there, which is not going to let me do. Show more options. I just want to paste a shortcut. Paste a shortcut to the, there we go. We're there. So now if I close all of this down, it should be on my flipping desktop somewhere. There it is. I know I can't see very well because of my crazy background, but there we go. There it is, right there. So if I open it up, it doesn't want to know. There, Audio input is muted to avoid feedback. Okay, fair enough. Waiting for Seashell to connect. Right, so that's a good sign. Let me find my special Instruo USB-C cable. The back of here somewhere. Plug it into one of the ports on the side if I can find one. There we go. I wonder what happens now. Not a lot. Just going to close this and open it again to see whether it then sees the Seashell. Seashell detected. Good. Error connecting to Seashell. Connection timeout. I'm just going to do a reboot. Let's try our controller again. Straight in. Alright, so there's a lesson for you. You're going to need to, once this is plugged in, it looks like you need to reboot. One reason or another. Who knows? Who cares? Doesn't really matter. It's just understanding how we get to the point we need to get to. Alright, so this is our controller. So the connection is there. That's really nice. Sadly, it's not touch sensitive, which is a shame. Right, so with it installed, it has this really annoying thing at the top that talks about the input being muted and such like. If you bring up the settings, this is an entire MIDI audio application somehow, but for which you don't really need the audio. This will become clearer when we talk about using it with a DAW, but for the moment it has this I don't quite understand why it needs a feedback loop or not a feedback loop. None of this I don't think is important. What's important is that when you start this up, it connects via its own USB MIDI port to the Seashell. So this is connected via USB cable into the side here. I've also got another audio interface connected because I'll be using that in a minute. But when you launch this, it will detect it and then it will create this connection between the two. And the first thing that happens is that the software pulls in the hardware settings. Now this is brilliant. Let me tell you why. See the filter, right? Move the filter, moves on screen. Yeah, blah, blah, whatever. That's fine. We're used to that kind of thing. That connection is really nice, really fast. There's no lag or anything like that. Now, look what happens. If I grab it with the mouse and move it, you go, yeah, okay. So I'm now moving the filter. Great. But look at that white line. See what that white line is? That is where the hardware control is pointing at. So if I move it with software, I will also know exactly where the hardware is pointed at and whether it's going to leap to it or not. So as I move this, it then leaps to it. This connection of showing you where the hardware is pointing at as well as showing you what the software is doing is brilliant. I don't think I've ever seen that. I'm pretty sure I've never seen that. And it's a really fabulous thing. So if something is being moved or generated or MIDI controlled, you can still see where it is relative to the hardware within the plugin, because you're not able to automate the hardware knobs, and so it gives you a good idea of where that relationship lies. That's excellent. Alright, that bit over with. What do you get? Well, the basic layout in the regular non-extended standard version, it gives you a couple of extra things. So here are our two oscillators. Here's our Wavefolder, annoyingly done in knobs, not in a slider as it is on the hardware, but you know, you can't do everything. So the first thing that you can do in the software that you can't do in the hardware is change the Wavefolder into a sawtooth. So rather than having a sine wave, you've now got something going on in a sawtoothy kind of shape. You have this bias knob which sort of shifts the middle position, but you've got this animate function, and that just creates this sort of shifting, modulating movement within the waveform. Nothing extreme, just gentle ebbing and flowing of something going on, which is really, really nice. We can also access the pulse width modulation from here. So if we go to Oscillator 2, we've got pulse width here. This is also animated by default with a little bit of movement just to give you that juiciness of pulse width modulation. So those are the main things on the standard page that the software adds immediately to the hardware. You've also got key tracking for the filter. Which is nice. Over here on this left side you have transposition and also 1 volt per octave, so you can enable which oscillator is being affected or being controlled by an analog sequencing signal going into the 1 volt per octave input. You can disable them both. I don't know why you would do that, but you can have one or the other, so you can be using the other oscillator for some other thing. Who knows what? Some form of modulation, I suspect. You can turn those on and off. You've then got this sort of quantization system here. So you can transpose each of the oscillators by turning them on, and then they step up and down as you turn them in semitones rather than in fine tuning. And you can take this out so it can be just the ones you want. Which is rather nice. So from here down the bottom you have the envelope section. It shows you what's triggering the envelope, whether it's analog or looping or MIDI, so we're using MIDI now. Shows you the envelope mode. You can swap between them here. Here of course you get access to sustain. And you can also change the curve from linear to exponential and turn the VCA on and off. So what you find is that you start running into those things that are missing from one or the other. So I'm just using the software, and I can do a lot of stuff and add new things and do bits and pieces, but I can't affect the resonance. I can't control the envelope amount. So there are things, it feels like you are pulled from one to the other rather. It's really interesting. It feels somehow I don't know, like there's this shift of attention. You're not entirely sure where to place your focus, and I think that's going to say a lot about the way that you might use the Seashell. You know, is this the actual ideal way to use it with the software and the hardware open at the same time? Is that actually going to make things more interesting when you're playing, or is it going to make it more difficult? And perhaps the software is really more useful when you're going into detailed sound design and editing as opposed to just messing about. Perhaps. I don't know. It's just interesting because when I was focusing on the software, it was immediately apparent that things were missing. And then you go back to the hardware, you have all your fun there, and then you're got one eye poking over here going, oh, is there something I could do over there? Well, yeah, maybe I don't want that key tracking. Maybe I don't want that animation, you know. Oh, it's fascinating. It's such a curious device. So let's expand and see what else we can get to in the expanded digital modulation section. So everything's just shifted a little bit over here to make room, and what we find is we've got a digital LFO down here, with a couple of different modes, and polarity and rate that can either be synced or not synced. It's very, very simple, very straightforward. Then over here you have the matrix. Now the matrix has all sorts of modulation possibilities. You choose a source. This includes the CV input on the back, including the end of the cycle of the envelope, which is quite interesting. Trigger inputs or MIDI. You can do everything via a MIDI controller number as you wish. You can also bring in velocity. I'm not going to do any of that MIDI shenanigans in this review. It's just, you know, you've got to draw a line somewhere, but there's lots of that potential within here to make it a fully MIDI responsible instrument. And then for destinations, you've got level diffuse amount. You can send something just directly out the CV out. Filters, all the things that you'd expect. You've got all sorts of additional bits with the oscillators in what it is you want to affect. There's a lot of interesting stuff you can do in here. And you can have one modulator affecting 4 different outcomes. There is only the one LFO though, so that's all you got to play with, but it's a different one to the Oscillator 2, which you can use separately, or the envelope, which you can use separately. So, I mean, strictly speaking, there's 3 LFOs, I suppose. Now, probably the best way to have a look at what this can do is to go through some of the presets. It has presets, in case you weren't aware. That all of this can be saved and then recalled as a preset. Bear in mind, there are a few things that aren't included in that. The resonance, the envelope amounts of the filter and the Wavefolder. Little bits and pieces which are not saved within that moment, within that capture. But by the by, we have presets up here. So let's load a few. Now, I would be it would be remiss of me not to point out that the preset browsing is a little bit on the, you know, basic side. Essentially, you have to open a folder. Here's a bunch of folder presets like bass, and I can open that one, and then using the arrows at the top, I can step through those, but only those. I can't go up again to another folder. I have to come out and open another folder to go in. It's a little bit kind of rubbish. It could be a lot better. Preset browsing is something that I think we've conquered these days, so you know, in version 1.1 that's something perhaps they could do. Or I mean, heck, you could just scoop all the presets into one folder. Then that would ultimately solve the problem, but then you wouldn't be categorized. Anyway, let's try some of these presets out just for a few minutes. I'll just zoom through a bunch and you'll be able to see how the matrix is changing. Now, one interesting thing to note is that the diffuse knob now, if you want, can control in extended mode the depth of modulation in the matrix. So with this particular sound here, as I turn it, it increases the depth of modulation. So it becomes sort of this macro knob. It's so great. Percussive. There's one more thing to look at. Don't worry, we are so nearly there now. But what has become apparent to me in using this and getting this together is that there's a lot of interesting stuff in here. The way that the software and the hardware works together is worth looking into a bit deeper. Otherwise, I think people might struggle with it a little bit, or run into some difficulties, or ignore one or the other. And I think it's only through using all of it that it really becomes a top-notch combination. So let me pile into a couple of DAWs just to show you how that works, because it's not necessarily straightforward. Now, in Jason's video, he did some stuff on the Apple Mac, which is fine, and that seems to be relatively straightforward. On Windows and the way that I approach things, it's just a bit complicated. And so going through that, if you bear with me, will hopefully help you do it quicker. So what I've come to understand about the Seashell is that when you run its little controller app, as I've talked about and mentioned this previously, about the MIDI and audio part of it, this weird settings thing here, in how it appears to have audio drivers and MIDI drivers. Now, what's important about that is that you need essentially to ignore them entirely. Now, the software requires them in order to communicate properly and cleverly as it does with the Seashell, but it has the ability very easily to trip you up when configuring your DAW and perhaps making settings that are just not going to work and will end up leaving you frustrated. So let's have a look at that. So first of all, Bitwig. So my setup here under audio, I'm using the Bitwig Connect as the audio interface, which is fine. Now, if you look under Wasopi or Windows drivers, you will find an output for the Seashell. You'll also find an input for the Seashell. Now, you don't want to be using those. You can theoretically use them to route audio in and out, but honestly, on Windows, it's not worth the bother. They're only Windows drivers. It's not ASIO. There is potential for connecting two different audio interfaces together, but all of that is really working far too hard just to try to record the output of the Seashell. If you treat the Seashell as any other external synthesizer where it has its own outputs, you can plug those into your audio interface and record it that way. So just for starters, ignore any audio drivers pertaining to the Seashell. So leave that alone. Next, go to MIDI. Now this has a USB MIDI in and out, but again, you don't want to use it because the Seashell needs that all by itself. If you allocate the Seashell MIDI to anything else, to a controller within here, for instance down here somewhere I could allocate the Seashell MIDI to a generic controller. If you do that, then the editor, the Seashell controller, will not load. So don't have anything selected there. Okay, got that. Good. So how then do you address it is the question. So at the moment I've got MIDI going directly into this, And that's fine for playing it, but that's not going to enable me to sequence it. So to sequence it, I'm going to need to use the output of the Bitwig Connect to connect directly to this, as if this is an external instrument without MIDI. So to load the plugin, I'll go to plugins over here. I will come all the way down to S for Seashell. There somewhere, Seashell Controller. I'll bring that across. Now what's interesting is that it loads as an audio plugin, not as a MIDI plugin. But there it is. And it's working because this grabs the MIDI control, the MIDI USB control with the Seashell directly and completely. That is a wedded operation. You can't interfere with it, otherwise it won't work. So leave all the MIDI for the Seashell and its controller and ignore all the audio interfaces. That's how you're going to get it to work. Now we can do something similar over in Ableton Live, just so you can see that too. Under the preferences, again, the audio does not want to have anything to do with the Seashell at all. But if you go to MIDI, you want to make sure that the Seashell is not ticked here or anywhere here. It needs to be completely not in use, otherwise it will not work. I mean, I can show you if you like, if I connect those two up like so, and then bring across the Seashell controller. Seashell detected. Error. Okay, if I go back to the preferences, turn those off, just get rid of that track and start again. There's our connection. Okay, do you get it? Good, because that's very important. Now, just for flipping belts and braces, just so we fully understand what's going on within a DAW, I'm going to transfer over to my desktop, run Studio One, and show you how that integration works. Right, I wanted to see if I could actually integrate the Seashell with my DAW and have everything, MIDI and audio, flowing correctly. Now, when I was showing it over on my desk where I do my videos, it's just a bit cramped and crowded and difficult to manipulate windows in that particular environment. So I want to sit down and do it properly to make sure that I fully understand it and can articulate it and demonstrate it to my fellow Windows users out there. Now, the audio output of this from the headphone socket is going directly into my SSL interface here, into channels 3 and 4. I've got MIDI coming out of the launch key over here, direct MIDI going into here, and we have sound and MIDI. Now, what I believe is that when we go into the DAW, I'm going to need to go MIDI USB from this, so disconnect the MIDI here, and then have a physical MIDI connection going to this. I believe that's the way to do it. That's the way I'm going to attempt to do it. Let's just see what happens. And hopefully this will be illuminating in really grasping how the app and this work together. So I've got no tracks at all. I'm going to disconnect that MIDI because that's not what I'm going to need. I'm going to need to connect to it via the output, MIDI output of this. So here's my cable. So this is the one from there. Going MIDI in. Come on, MIDI out. You must function, surely. I've got a connection. I've got a connection. So if I was to create an instrument track, an external instrument track, external launch key output, SSL MIDI out. That's working. So I've now got MIDI going via, I mean, it gets complicated. It doesn't need to be this complicated. It just is how our world is. So I've got my launch key here connected via USB to my computer, and that's sending MIDI into Studio One. Yes. And then that MIDI is coming out of the MIDI output on my SSL into the Instruo. So I'm not using the USB connection at all. Got it? Good. So I could sequence in here. like so. Create a little pattern. So that's all fine. So how do I then get to those deeper functions? Well, we need to load the plugin. So we should find it under Effects. It's not there as an instrument. It should be there as an audio plugin. Seashell Controller, there we go. So I'm going to drop this on my MIDI track just to see what happens. So that creates a new audio track. But even so, the app has grasped the MIDI in and out of the Instruo over USB. So it's now using that USB connection to provide the all the modulation and bits and pieces. So that's good. But how then do I automate this? And how do I keep these two things together? Or do these two things stay apart? Because essentially, if I'm going to be recording this, I'm going to be having to set up an audio track which has the input coming in. In fact, could I use this on that audio track? Would that matter? Would audio flow through it? Would that matter? So what I'm grasping here is I can record onto that track. It is an audio effect, but it's having no effect on the audio that's playing back through it. So that's neither here nor there. But I am having this dual track thing going on where I've got MIDI for this, and then I need to have an audio track in order to run the app. So that's interesting, mildly inconvenient, I suppose, because it could, if it was a VST instrument, then, well, that still wouldn't really work because you need the MIDI out, because you're not using MIDI through this to that. But then why couldn't you do that? It does raise some questions, to be honest, on the approach to this, in how I understand this solid connection between the two, but also it's a bit of a faff, you know. It takes a little bit of working out, and it feels like it could have been simpler, or it may well, hopefully, be simpler down the line. Now, let's get rid of that audio track so it's not confusing me. How then do we automate this? Because it's going to be automating on this audio track and not on this MIDI track. I'm supposing. So if I open up the control bit here, filter cutoff for instance, I'm going to want to see that not controlled. I want to see the automation of it there. Okay, so I could set up some automation over the filter cutoff. That does work. Good. Let's try some other bits like the fold. Stick in the automation. I'm just going to go like that. I'm going to need a wavefolding thing in order to hear that. So super. I could turn on the frequency of that, put on automation for that, bring in a nice sort of sine wave, stick in a load of that. Yeah, so that all functions, and you can have all of that shown together all on one thing after thing after thing. Yes, excellent. So that's how that comes together then. You have a MIDI channel which is driving the MIDI into this that you're using via an external MIDI interface or some other MIDI interface. And then you have an audio track with the audio plugin loaded of the Seashell controller, and that can then access and communicate directly with the Seashell, bypassing anything else within the DAW. That has its own direct connection, provided that you ignore the Instruo audio and MIDI within your DAW. Right, I think I've aced it. I mean, just to say, this is exactly the sort of workflow that you're probably going to end up using it for. It's a piece of synthesizer desktop hardware that you would have next to your computer, that you would use the app for detailed sound editing and bits and pieces, and then you would drop to the hardware for tweaking and performance and sorting out other bits and pieces. I wonder whether I can record the movements here. Okay, let's try that out. So let's take off these other bits. Okay, let's try that. Let's try that again. That is precisely what you do. Okay, genius. So that all functions really, really well. That direct connection, you know, it's actually simplifying things, because you're not having to set a whole load of other stuff up and work out how to get a controller to route to a thing. It is just working. And this isn't even sending MIDI through a normal means. It's sending MIDI back to this, to an audio track, which is then recording those, you know, it melts your brain if you think about it for too long, but that is exactly how it should work. That's quite brilliant. So as I say, yes, having this next to your computer in some kind of way is the perfect place for it, because you get the best of both worlds. You get the controller app and you get the hardware, and you can spin and flow between the two, and the DAW, that seamless integration they talk about, is absolutely there once you've bent your mind around it. Haha, that's what I'm best at. Mind bending things. The Seashell then, what do we make of it? You know, I wish sometimes that I could be the sort of YouTube reviewer who just makes beautiful videos of slow panning cameras and sumptuous music and out of focus things that then focus and then move on, and then just do a couple of bits to camera about how fabulous everything is, and then sort of move on and be done in 10 minutes. That's just not me. I love a product that I can get my teeth into, that I can bear down upon and really dig into what it's all about. That to me is fascinating and interesting, and the Seashell has absolutely done that. It's taken me on a bit of a journey, I have to say. Part of that is because when I was first working with it, I had a lot of conversations with Instruo about various bits and pieces that I wasn't quite understanding or getting, and a lot of that was down to the fact that I had an old firmware, and after I updated the firmware, it was a much smoother experience, I have to say. But there are elements, particularly within Windows, that are a little clunky. I know that Instruo are aiming for this absolutely sweet and smooth integration of software and hardware, and for the most part that absolutely is true. But there are elements when it isn't, and that's okay. And part of what I do is just crunch into those bits and pieces in order to just see how robust these things are. Is it going to survive your desktop experience, your studio experience, your live performance experience? All of these things fascinate me, and that's why I spend such a long time on a product that's as interesting and fascinating as this, and really try to make sure that I do all the things that people are going to do. It's very easy as a reviewer to just gloss over little bits and pieces that perhaps aren't working as intuitively or automatically as perhaps they could. But that's just not me. I like to lean in because I really want to know what it's about, and I really want people watching my videos to get a sense of what everything is about. So that said, what do I ultimately think of it? What do you think of it? The Cockerel is very keen to get involved. Very keen to get involved. Well, my sense of the whole Seashell experience is that it's beautifully done. You know, but barring the little humps along the way that perhaps you have to get over. Once you understand that there's bits you're fighting with that you don't need to fight with, that you just need to go with it and understand that it is forging its own pathways between its software and hardware, and what you need to do is understand that and go with it. Once you have, it's a beautiful experience. I've never seen a connection quite like it. There are certainly other MIDI editors out there which connect these things together, software and hardware. It's becoming increasingly common to have an app version of your hardware to play with in software, but so often that's just a MIDI connection, whereas this seems to be something more than that. Because it exists as an audio plugin, it has this deeper connection somehow that I can't quite entirely explain. But I like the way that you start it up and the connection is there. You're not having to create pathways for it or allocate it MIDI, this, that, and the other, anything like that. Once the app is running, the connection is made, and it's flawless at that point. Very much. The sound is lovely. Two oscillators that really feed into one another, particularly with the wavefolding side, which is not something that you always get. We're very familiar with a two oscillator voice, you know, all the way from the Oberheim Sem, and from that point going forward, it's a very familiar voice setup. But the architecture here, introducing that wavefolder, gives you a very different mix of waveforms. It gives you a sense that there's different edges and different tonal libraries to explore. And the front panel on the cutest little adorably small seashell is enough to satisfy all of those little explorations, all of those journeys, all those little adventures in sound. It's all there on the front panel. I think they're getting strangled. But then when you engage the software, it adds this additional level, these elements that you can really start to sound design in, really start to push out the boundaries of just a live performance synth into something else. Modulation matrix, the different options with wavefolding and pulse width modulation, and then using that digital LFO to push things around. Yeah. It is different. It's not as straightforward as having a little semi-modular synthesizer just to play with. You can, but there's more to it than that. And that does give you both a certain degree of bafflement into where these things come from, where they lie, how you should be using it, as well as giving you a lot of opportunity to do new things and to break new ground. I think my comments about it sitting next to your computer and being like a hardware controller over a software thing and a software controller over a hardware thing, as that being the best place to have it, that could be it. Yeah, that could be it. What I like is how you are going to be using this piece of analog hardware within your DAW structure to the point that you are saving bits within your DAW and recalling it. That's not something you can do on every little desktop synthesizer that you have. So that is nice. That means it's going to have more than a spontaneous existence within your projects, because you can come back to it, recall it, and change it, like you can with software synths. You know, and that's a definite advantage because it's hardware. You get the hardware performance feel at the same time as those other software advantages. So yeah, interesting. I had no idea that it would not be straightforward. I mean, it is, but I'm absolutely making it not straightforward because I'm intent on pushing into every corner to see what it is all about. Because it's different and it's worth talking about in that way. Now you can buy it as a piece of hardware and just use it like that. Absolutely. And if you did, it's a beautiful little thing. It's a premium product. It's not a throwaway purchase. You are spending quite a bit of money to get a semi-modular synthesizer. It's on a similar price point to the Mother 32, for instance, or something like that, which is a much bigger synthesizer. And that does make me wonder a little bit, because all of the extra stuff that's in the software is in the hardware. There's nothing in the plugin or the controller which is providing additional features or additional data or information. It's all actually in the hardware. So you can program a preset in the software and it's all happening. You can disconnect the Seashell, take it to your gig, power it up and play that same preset without having to plug it into a computer at all. It will all be there. And it makes me wonder whether if it was a larger device, couldn't they just push it out a bit so that all of those features were available on the front panel? Why have some that are only available in software? Or perhaps the way it was developed was that they've got this cute, wonderful little synthesizer and they found more room inside and thought, well, we could add some further bits. And then that gives us an opportunity to work on some software changes and software implementation that might be interesting. So maybe that's the way it went. But I just wonder, or would desire all of that functionality to be in the hardware if I had a choice in the matter. But as it is, the integration, the flow from one to the other works really well, provided that you don't mind that shifting hardware to software. If you're purely a hardware person, then maybe you're going to be missing out on a few bits and pieces. Silence. So, yes, what a lovely thing. Seashell from Instruo. I really hope that was helpful in discerning what it is this is all about and getting to the bottom of it all. Deeply fascinating, intriguing, sounds brilliant. It's lovely with some additional effects. Or beautiful by itself, whichever way you want to take it. I hope that was helpful. In the meantime, go make some tunes.